well been talking today about the return of international travel, or the first tentative steps anyway. The CEO of Ryanair, Eddie Wilson, joins me. Eddie, how are flights going in and out of Ireland for Ryanair today?
Yeah, going very well. I mean, like it's been back up and running anyway in the rest of Europe since the 1st of July. We never stopped flying throughout this, over the, particularly this summer. But it's just, flights are now. I was in Italy last week, for example, on business down there, and internal flights are absolutely full. The US is back, China is back, and I think Ireland is last to it today. But the flights are going well.
And how busy?
Oh yeah. We would have had last month load factors of about 72%. So 72% of the seats are full. That's growing, and you'd expect that to grow, particularly in the summer months. But there's a different booking curve, as we would call it. Like normally people booking for July and August, a lot of people would have booked in a normal year, would have booked like anywhere from last January onwards, and that clearly didn't happen during COVID. So you have people that are, I suppose, starting to book now with sort of the whole stop-start thing. You can understand that some people want to see it actually happening first rather than just listen to the news flow, which changed every day.
I was going to ask about that because we were talking about it. There was research out during the week, and another kind of poll of people's attitudes, and a lot of people expressed the reservations about flying. But what the behavioural economist we spoke to acknowledged was that once they see people flying and once they see the system up and running, people are much more likely then to book it. Is that the expectation from yourselves and others in the industry?
It's like everything in life. Once the neighbours are going, you're going, I think that. But it's not all just about. We tend to get obsessed about the idea of people going on their summer holidays, But I mean, economies are now bouncing back, and this economy needs tourists coming the other way, And we've sent out really strong signals in Ireland over the last 6 months that we were closed for business, and we're going to have to make that up as a country. If Ireland's going to have those connections, particularly this winter is the one that I think we'd all, the tourism industry should really worry about, particularly hotels in Dublin. Hotels in Dublin have been empty for months now, and a lot of those hotels rely on Ryanair and bringing in weekend tourists. We still don't have the restaurants open, and so I think this winter is still uncertain for Ireland, and there are less flights to be had, and Ireland isn't competing for those at the moment. I've opened bases 2 weeks ago in Agadir in Morocco. I opened bases in Copenhagen, in Italy, and in various other countries in Croatia as well, where we've opened 2 bases. So they're airplanes that are not necessarily coming from Ireland, but they certainly aren't going to go to Ireland because they've gone elsewhere.
So this is a manifestation, is it, of some of the things that you and others were warning about, that there would be a legacy from shutting down the industry?
It is, because we're last as usual. And it's great to be open today, and it's great to be on talking about something that is good news. But I think we can sort of overestimate the effect of this in terms of people wanting to go on their summer holidays, which is great. But also, I think it's really about, is Ireland open, and about connectivity, because you could find yourself next winter for some of the regional airports, and in Dublin especially, you could see that they won't have the same level of routes, because we've already made commitments and done deals with other airports and that throughout Europe, and there's less airplanes going to be around. Most of the airlines in Europe are technically bankrupt. They've been bailed out by their governments, and they're going to look after their own countries first. We don't have a state carrier here anymore. We've 2 private companies. We've got Ryanair and you've got Aer Lingus, as part of the Spanish-owned IAG group, and they've got to make a profit, and you're going to put the aircraft where you can get the best return. And Ireland has been last to that. So, Eamon Ryan, Minister for Transport, really needs to do something with that report that was given to him last year by the Aviation Task Force, and find some way of incentivising traffic so that now that we're reopened, that we don't lose that connection.
Well, what would your suggestion, what's your preference in terms of incentivising traffic? Now that we have, if I'd been speaking to you a few weeks ago, it would have been, get to this date, listen, we need to start travelling, other countries are doing it. We're now at that point, travel has started in and out. What does he need to do to incentivise more of it?
It's in the Aviation Task Force, which said, look, what you got to do is that this isn't any sort of sweetheart deal for Ryanair. It's for anyone who can contribute by putting resources into Ireland to bring seat levels back to where they were, at least back in 2019. If you don't do that, and there's less aircraft around, not just with Ryanair, but with all the airlines, then that traffic will go elsewhere,
Yeah.
and it's going to take a long, long time to come back. There's just fewer airline seats in Europe, and that's going to be the case for the next number of years. And we're the one nation that actually needs airline seats because there's no other way of getting here in any sort of numbers. And we were last. We still haven't done anything about that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And you've made the. But I mean, what's your preference? What's Ryanair's preference in terms of incentivizing airlines so that we get back to that point where we had the same number of seats?
Yeah, what they would simply do is that they would reduce airport charges for everybody, and say, look, we should have a special designation as in Ireland in the EU. We're the only sort of large island economy that's still there, and they should at least be able to preserve that. I mean, like there is, you've got state-owned carriers in Germany, France, Netherlands getting billions of euros being waved through by the EU Commission, and the Irish government, for this big fund that's available in the EU, should say, look, we want to incentivise any airline, not just Ryanair, Aer Lingus, whoever else wants to come in here, and put in the same amount of routes and seats that we had in 2019. And a good way of doing that would be to say to the airlines, like, we'll have a holiday or something for a year or two on airport charges, and it would be available to everyone, and that would restore that automatically. But that's not going to happen.
A short-term holiday. You won't come on then in a year or two and say we've got to keep them going.
Well, like, I mean, the EU wouldn't allow it. You couldn't have a holiday of airport charges forever. What you would have is that you want to restore traffic. If you restore traffic, then you return to profitability, and then you stay there. What's going to happen is that some of that capacity goes elsewhere and doesn't come back. So the winter is going to be really important. It's great today. Like, people can now book with confidence. You know, the boarding process is really easy. I mean, like, nearly 70% of adults in Ireland are now double vaccinated, and you know, showing your pass as you get on is the same as showing your passport now, and it'll become less and less, I think, as time goes on, as vaccination levels get to 90-95%. You know,
how has today gone in terms of COVID check-ins and the travel certificate working?
It's gone well, because like there are slightly different requirements even in some of the EU countries, but by and large you have to fill out what's called a passenger locator form in each country, and that tells you what you should have in terms of how the digital passport is presented. But like, if you're vaccinated and you've got the digital passport, you're not going to have a difficulty at all.
And are they being checked? Because we've been speaking to some people, including Paul Quinn of Virgin Media. He's something I'm going to be speaking to him just a minute, from Spain, who didn't have his COVID cert checked at all through the airport. Now,
because it's slightly different going. I'd heard about this, like, going into Spain. When you fill out the passenger locator form in Spain, that is the check, because what you're saying is that generates you're making a solemn declaration to the Spanish government to say that I filled out this thing correctly, I'm staying in XYZ or whatever, and it generates one of these QR codes, which you just show. We don't have to check the digital certificate going through, because you've already made that declaration. So there's slight differences between countries, so it's not a question.
So people flying out of here into Spain, it's the rules that the Spanish are applying would apply to them going through Dublin Airport, and that's the rule in Spain.
And the staff that actually man that flight, okay, in terms of boarding, they go on to the next one, which is an Italian one, and it's slightly different. It's just that the Spanish one generates a QR code of itself, so that when you arrive in Spain, it's their QR code. But you've made a solemn declaration of, you know, that you've complied with the law, and you would have had to fill out it's called a passenger locator form. But it's not a question of you have to see the digital certificate in every jurisdiction at boarding.
Yeah.
It depends on the country.
All right. Well, listen, Eddie, we appreciate your time. Eddie Wilson is the CEO of Ryanair.